Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a world where survival wasn't just about enduring winter. It was about transforming bitter cold into something livable through pure human ingenuity. Imagine snow piled 15 feet high against wooden walls, winds howling at -40 degrees, and your only protection being a structure made entirely from bark, poles, and the collective wisdom of generations who refuse to let winter win. So before we dive in, hit that like button. If you're curious about survival techniques that actually work, and subscribe if you want more deep dives into how our ancestors mastered challenges that would probably finish most of us off in a single night. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing the global community we've built here. Now, picture this. It's 1450 CE in what we now call upstate New York. The temperature outside has plummeted to 20 below zero. Snow crunches underfoot with that sharp squeak that only happens when it's truly frigid. Your breath forms instant clouds that freeze and fall like tiny crystals. And yet somehow, entire families, sometimes up to 100 people, are sleeping peacefully inside what looks like nothing more than a giant wooden basket covered in tree bark. This isn't a story about barely surviving winter. This is about Native Americans, particularly the Haudenosaunee, who engineered one of the most sophisticated communal heating systems ever developed. They didn't just endure the cold, they conquered it using principles that modern engineers are still impressed by today. These longhouses weren't primitive shelters. They were thermal powerhouses disguised as simple buildings. But here's what's truly remarkable. While European settlers were huddling around individual fireplaces, losing fingers to frostbite and burning through massive amounts of wood just to keep a single family warm, Native Americans had created structures that could maintain comfortable temperatures for dozens of families using a fraction of the fuel. They had cracked the code on something that stumped engineers for centuries: how to heat large spaces efficiently in brutal winter conditions. The secret wasn't just in the building itself, though that's a masterpiece of engineering we'll explore. It was in understanding that survival isn't an individual sport. It's a team effort where every person, every breath, every carefully placed stick of firewood becomes part of a larger system designed to keep everyone alive until spring returns. Let me set the scene more vividly. When European missionaries first encountered these longhouses in winter, they were baffled. Here were structures that seemed to violate everything they knew about heating and insulation. The buildings were enormous, some stretching over 200 feet long. They housed what seemed like impossible numbers of people, and yet visitors consistently reported that the interiors were not just survivable, but genuinely warm. Some even complained it was too hot inside. One Jesuit missionary wrote about entering a longhouse during a blizzard and being so overwhelmed by the warmth that he had to remove his heavy winter coat within minutes. He described the contrast as shocking, going from life-threatening cold to tropical warmth in the span of a few steps. But he also noted something else that puzzled him. The building seemed to generate its own weather system. Smoke drifted in lazy patterns near the ceiling. Steam rose from cooking pots. And despite housing dozens of families, the air somehow remained breathable. This wasn't luck. This was the result of generations of experimentation, refinement, and engineering brilliance that most people today don't even realize existed. The Haudenosaunee had essentially invented the world's first passive solar heating system, combined it with radiant floor heating, thrown in some thermal mass principles, and topped it off with a ventilation system that would make modern HVAC engineers jealous. But before we dive into the engineering marvels, we need to understand what they were up against. Northeastern American winters weren't just cold. They were relentlessly, brutally, life-threatening cold. We're talking about months where the temperature barely climbed above zero during the day and could plummet to 40 below at night. Snow could pile up to the second story of buildings. Rivers froze solid enough to walk on. And the wind was a living thing that found every crack, every gap, every weakness in your defenses. In this environment, making a mistake wasn't just inconvenient, it was fatal. Let your fire go out and you'd be dead by morning. Fail to properly insulate your shelter and hypothermia would claim you before dawn. Run out of food and starvation would finish what the cold started. There was no room for error, no backup systems, no calling for help. You either got it right or nature selected you out of the gene pool. And yet, archaeological evidence shows us that Native American communities not only survived these winters, they thrived. Children were born and raised in longhouses. Elders lived to pass down knowledge to the next generation. Complex social structures developed and flourished. Art, music, storytelling, and spiritual practices all continued through the darkest months. These weren't people grimly hanging on until spring. These were communities that had turned winter into just another season to be managed and even enjoyed. So how did they do it? The answer lies in understanding that a longhouse wasn't just a building, it was a living system. Every component, from the way the poles were bent to create the frame, to the specific types of bark used for covering, to the precise placement of fire pits and sleeping platforms, was designed to work together in harmony. Remove any single element, and the whole system would fail. Let's start with the basic structure, because this is where the genius becomes apparent. Imagine you're tasked with building a shelter for 100 people in an environment where temperatures regularly drop to deadly levels. Your materials are limited to what you can find in the forest. You have no nails, no metal tools, no concrete, just wood, bark, and human ingenuity. Most people would probably think small and individual. Build lots of little shelters, one for each family. That's the intuitive approach, and it's exactly what European colonists did. But the Haudenosaunee thought bigger and communal. They realized that when it comes to thermodynamics, size matters. A larger structure has a better ratio of internal volume to external surface area. That means less heat loss per person inside, but it's not just about size, it's about shape. The Longhouse design wasn't rectangular by accident. That elongated oval shape, with its curved roof, was aerodynamically designed to shed wind and snow while maximizing internal air circulation. The curve of the roof wasn't just structural, it was thermal. Hot air naturally rises, and that curved ceiling guided the heated air in a circulation pattern that distributed warmth evenly throughout the structure. The frame itself was a masterpiece of flexible engineering. Instead of rigid posts that would snap under the weight of heavy snow or the stress of extreme temperature changes, they used living poles that were bent and shaped while green. These poles maintained some flexibility even after they dried, allowing the entire structure to flex and move with the forces of winter without breaking. But here's where it gets really clever. The frame wasn't just functional, it was modular. Longhouses could be extended or shortened based on the size of the community they needed to house. Archaeological evidence shows longhouses that were clearly expanded over time, with new sections added as families grew or as communities merged. This wasn't just practical, it was brilliant urban planning for a nomadic culture. The covering system was equally sophisticated. Multiple layers of bark, primarily elm and cedar, were carefully overlapped like giant shingles. But this wasn't random. Different types of bark were used for different purposes. Elm bark, with its fibrous structure, provided excellent insulation. Cedar bark, with its natural oils, repelled moisture and insects. The outer layer was often treated with natural preservatives to extend its lifespan. Between these bark layers, families stuffed additional insulating materials. Dried grasses, cattail fluff, moss, even animal fur were used to create dead air spaces that dramatically improved thermal performance. This created what amounted to a multi-layered insulation system that rivals modern building techniques in its effectiveness. The smoke hole system was perhaps the most ingenious element of the entire design. These weren't just random openings in the roof. They were carefully positioned vents that could be adjusted based on weather conditions and the number of fires burning inside. Bark flaps could be opened or closed to regulate airflow, creating a primitive but effective HVAC system. During mild weather, the holes would be opened wide to allow maximum ventilation and light. During storms, they could be nearly closed to prevent heat loss and snow infiltration. The positioning of these holes created natural convection currents that drew fresh air in through lower openings while allowing smoke and stale air to escape through the roof. But the real magic happened inside, and that's where we need to go next. Because all of this engineering brilliance was just the foundation for the most important element of Longhouse winter survival, the people themselves. The interior layout of a longhouse was nothing like what most people imagine when they think of Native American housing. This wasn't a single large room where everyone crowded together randomly. It was a carefully organized system of spaces, each designed for specific purposes and optimized for thermal efficiency. Running down the center of the longhouse was a wide aisle, typically about 10 feet across. This wasn't wasted space. It was the thermal highway of the entire structure. Along this central corridor, fire pits were positioned at regular intervals, usually about 20 feet apart. These weren't small campfires. They were substantial heating systems, carefully designed to maximize heat output while minimizing smoke production. On either side of this central aisle, raised platforms created two-story living spaces. The lower level served as work areas and winter storage. The upper level, about 4 feet above the ground, was where families slept, and spent most of their time during the coldest months. This elevation was crucial. Cold air sinks, and by raising the living spaces above ground level, families avoided the coldest layer of air inside the longhouse. Each family unit occupied a specific section, typically about 20 feet long. This gave them enough space for sleeping, storage, and privacy, while maintaining their connection to the communal heating system. Woven mats and hide curtains could be hung to create temporary walls when privacy was needed, but these barriers were designed to allow air circulation rather than block it. The sleeping arrangements were a masterclass in thermal management that we'll explore in detail, because this is where individual survival met community cooperation in the most intimate way possible. But the sleeping arrangements weren't just about personal comfort, they were about survival mathematics. Each longhouse section housed 2 families, one on each side of the central aisle. But during the depths of winter, those invisible family boundaries dissolved into something more fundamental: a human heating network. Picture this. As temperatures outside dropped to bone-breaking cold, families would abandon their individual sleeping spaces and cluster together in calculated formations. Children, who lose body heat fastest, were placed in the center of these human islands. Adults formed protective rings around them. Elders, despite generating less heat themselves, provided crucial thermal mass and stability to the arrangement. This wasn't random cuddling. This was precision engineering using human bodies as heating elements. A typical winter cluster might include 15 to 20 people pressed together under layers of fur and woven blankets. The combined body heat of this group could raise the temperature of their immediate sleeping area by 30 to 40 degrees above the ambient air temperature inside the longhouse. But here's what makes this system truly brilliant. It was self-regulating. Too many people in one cluster, and it became uncomfortably hot, causing people to spread out naturally. Too few, and the cold would drive them back together. The system found its own balance without any central authority or complex rules. The bedding itself was a technological marvel that most people today don't appreciate. We're not talking about simple animal skins thrown on wooden platforms. These were engineered sleep systems designed to trap and retain body heat while managing moisture and providing comfort during months of continuous use. The foundation layer consisted of tightly woven cattail or rush mats. These provided insulation from the wooden platform while creating air pockets that trapped warm air. On top of this came layers of animal hides, each selected for specific properties. Bear hides provided weight and durability. Deer hides offered softness and flexibility. Beaver pelts added water resistance and extra insulation. But the real genius was in the layering system. Instead of one thick blanket, families used multiple thinner layers that could be added or removed as conditions changed. This modular approach meant they could fine-tune their thermal environment throughout the night as temperatures fluctuated and as their own body heat production varied during different sleep cycles. The fire management system was equally sophisticated, and it had to be. These weren't decorative fireplaces or simple warmth sources. They were the beating hearts of a complex thermal ecosystem that had to operate flawlessly for months at a time. A single mistake could mean death for dozens of people. Each fire pit was carefully engineered for maximum efficiency. The size and shape were calculated to provide optimal heat output while minimizing fuel consumption. The depth was precisely measured to create proper airflow for complete combustion. The positioning relative to the smoke holes above ensured that toxic gases were drawn upward and away from the living spaces. But managing these fires required constant vigilance and deep expertise. Different types of wood were selected for different purposes and different times of day. Hardwoods like oak and maple burned slowly and provided steady, long-lasting heat, perfect for overnight warmth. Softwoods like pine and cedar ignited quickly and burned hot, ideal for rapid heating during the day or when temperatures dropped suddenly. The fire tenders, usually rotating shifts of adults throughout the night, had to read the subtle signs that indicated how each fire was performing. The color of the flames told them about combustion efficiency. The behavior of the smoke indicated air circulation patterns. The sound of the burning wood revealed moisture content and burn rate. This wasn't just about keeping fires lit. It was about orchestrating a complex symphony of combustion that kept dozens of fires burning in harmony while managing fuel consumption, air quality, and heat distribution. Get it wrong, okay? And you could asphyxiate everyone with carbon monoxide, burn down the entire structure, or simply run out of fuel when you needed it most. The fuel management system was equally critical and equally sophisticated. Longhouses required enormous amounts of firewood to operate throughout the winter months. A single structure might burn through several tons of wood between October and April. This meant that fuel procurement, processing, and storage had to be planned and executed with military precision. Families began preparing for winter months in advance. During the late summer and early fall, teams would venture into the forests to identify, harvest, and process the wood they would need. Different species were harvested at different times to optimize their burning characteristics. Green wood was cut and left to season. Dead standing timber was harvested for immediate use. Fallen branches were collected for kindling, but it wasn't enough to simply gather wood. It had to be processed into specific sizes and shapes for different purposes. Large logs for overnight burns, medium splits for daytime heating, small kindling for fire starting, tiny shavings for tinder. Each category had to be prepared in sufficient quantities to last through the entire winter season. Storage was another challenge entirely. The wood had to be kept dry, accessible, and organized, despite being stored in a structure that was constantly filled with moisture from cooking, breathing, and the snow that inevitably found its way inside. Sophisticated storage systems were built into the Longhouse design, with dedicated spaces for different types and sizes of fuel. The most ingenious aspect was the rotation system. Fresh wood was stored in the driest areas furthest from the fires. Seasoned wood ready for burning was moved to intermediate storage areas. Wood for immediate use was kept close to each fire pit. This constant rotation ensured that fuel was always available and always in optimal condition for burning. But even with perfect preparation, winter fuel management required constant attention. Adults took turns throughout the night checking fires, adding fuel, and monitoring burn rates. They had to balance heat production with fuel conservation, ensuring that they generated enough warmth to keep everyone alive while not burning through their wood stores too quickly. This was survival mathematics at its most precise. Burn too much wood early in the winter, and you might run out before spring. Burn too little, and people would freeze. The margin for error was essentially zero, and the consequences of miscalculation were fatal. The thermal management extended beyond just the fires themselves. Native Americans understood principles of heat transfer, thermal mass, and radiant heating that wouldn't be formally described by European science for centuries. They used these principles to create heating systems that were remarkably efficient and effective. Stone heating was one of their most ingenious innovations. Smooth river rocks were placed near the fires during the day, absorbing heat slowly and steadily. As evening approached and temperatures dropped, these heated stones were carefully moved to strategic locations throughout the Longhouse. Some were placed under sleeping areas, providing radiant heat that lasted for hours. Others were wrapped in hides and used as personal warming devices. The beauty of this system was its simplicity and effectiveness. A properly heated stone could provide steady warmth for 6 to 8 hours, long enough to get through the coldest part of the night. Multiple stones could be rotated in and out of the fires, creating a continuous heating system that didn't require constant fire tending. But the thermal mass wasn't limited to portable stones. The Longhouse structure itself became part of the heating system. The wooden frame absorbed heat during the day and released it slowly throughout the night. The bark covering stored thermal energy from the sun and from the interior fires. Even the earth floor beneath the structure became a thermal reservoir, storing and releasing heat in a daily cycle. The ventilation system was perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of the entire thermal management strategy. Managing air quality in a structure housing up to 100 people with multiple fires burning continuously while maintaining warmth and preventing toxic gas buildup required engineering skills that most people today don't possess. The smoke hole system wasn't just about letting smoke escape. It was about creating controlled air circulation patterns that brought fresh air in while removing stale air and combustion products. The holes were positioned to take advantage of natural convection currents and prevailing wind patterns. During different weather conditions, different combinations of holes would be opened or closed to optimize airflow. In calm conditions, several holes might be opened to maximize ventilation. During storms, most holes would be closed to prevent heat loss, with just enough ventilation maintained to prevent dangerous gas buildup. The people inside became part of the ventilation system themselves. Their breathing and movement created air currents that helped circulate fresh air throughout the structure. Their body heat contributed to the convection currents that drove the ventilation system. Even their positioning during sleep was calculated to optimize air circulation while maximizing warmth sharing. This integration of human activity with architectural design created a living system that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Longhouse wasn't just a building that people lived in. It was a symbiotic organism where human behavior and structural engineering worked together to create an environment that could sustain life in conditions that would quickly kill anyone attempting to survive alone. The psychological aspect of Longhouse winter survival were just as important as the physical engineering. And they reveal something profound about human nature and community resilience that we've largely forgotten in our modern world. Living through 4 to 6 months of brutal winter in close quarters with dozens of other people could easily become a psychological nightmare. Imagine being trapped in what amounts to a large, smoky room with your extended family, your neighbors, their children, their elderly relatives, and everyone's personal habits, quirks, and bad moods. Under normal circumstances, this would be a recipe for conflict, depression, and social breakdown. But the Haudenosaunee had developed social technologies that were just as sophisticated as their thermal engineering. They understood that mental health and community cohesion weren't luxuries during winter survival, they were absolute necessities. A community that fell apart psychologically would quickly fall apart physically, and everyone would die. The storytelling traditions weren't entertainment, they were survival tools. During the long winter nights when darkness stretched for 14 hours and there was little physical work that could be done, stories served multiple critical functions. They preserved essential knowledge about hunting, gathering, medicine, and survival techniques. They reinforced social bonds and community identity. And perhaps most importantly, they provided mental stimulation and emotional release during months when cabin fever could drive people to dangerous behavior. But these weren't random tales told to pass time. The winter storytelling cycles were carefully structured psychological programs designed to maintain mental health and social stability. Different types of stories were told at different points during the winter season. Early winter stories focused on preparation and community unity. Midwinter tales emphasized endurance and mutual support. Late winter narratives built anticipation for spring and renewal. The stories themselves were interactive experiences that engaged everyone in the Longhouse. Children were encouraged to ask questions and participate. Adults contributed their own memories and variations. Elders served as both teachers and entertainers, using their accumulated wisdom to guide younger generations through the psychological challenges of winter survival. Games and competitions provided another crucial outlet for mental energy and social bonding. Despite the limited space and resources, Longhouse communities developed elaborate gaming systems that could occupy people for hours or even days. These weren't simple diversions. They were sophisticated psychological tools designed to maintain mental acuity, resolve conflicts peacefully, and strengthen community bonds. Gambling games using carved bones or wooden pieces created excitement and friendly competition. Strategy games developed critical thinking skills that would prove valuable during hunting and warfare seasons. Physical games adapted for indoor spaces helped people maintain fitness and burn off excess energy that might otherwise lead to conflict. The social hierarchy within longhouses was carefully managed to prevent the kinds of power struggles that could destroy community cohesion. Leadership roles were distributed among different individuals based on expertise rather than concentrated in single authority figures. The clan mothers who owned the Longhouses held ultimate authority over domestic matters. But hunting leaders managed food procurement, and war chiefs handled external threats. This distributed leadership system meant that no single person could dominate others or make decisions that affected everyone without community input. It also meant that conflicts between individuals didn't automatically escalate into community-wide problems because there were multiple authority figures who could mediate disputes and maintain balance. Privacy management was another crucial psychological consideration. Despite living in extremely close quarters, families found ways to create personal space and maintain dignity. Hanging mats could provide visual barriers when needed. Established etiquette governed when and how people could move through different areas of the Longhouse. Even sleeping arrangements included protocols for maintaining personal boundaries while sharing warmth. The work distribution during winter months was carefully organized to give everyone meaningful roles and prevent the kind of idleness that breeds discontent. Children had age-appropriate responsibilities that made them feel valuable to the community. Adults rotated through different tasks to prevent boredom and ensure that everyone developed multiple skills. Elders were given respected roles as advisors and teachers rather than being treated as burdens. Women maintained control over food distribution, storage management, and domestic organization. Men handled hunting, fuel procurement, and external security. But these roles weren't rigidly enforced, and people could contribute in multiple areas based on their individual skills and interests. This flexibility prevented the kind of gender-based conflicts that could arise when people are confined together for months. The spiritual practices integrated into daily Longhouse life provided another layer of psychological support. These weren't separate religious observances, but continuous practices woven into every aspect of winter survival. Morning gratitude ceremonies acknowledged the gift of surviving another night. Evening prayers expressed appreciation for warmth, food, and community. Seasonal rituals marked the passage of time and maintained hope for spring's return. These spiritual practices served multiple psychological functions. They provided structure and routine during months when the natural rhythms of day and night were disrupted by extreme weather. They created shared experiences that reinforced community bonds, and they maintained connection to larger meanings and purposes that helped people endure physical hardships and emotional challenges. The medical and health management systems within Longhouses were remarkably sophisticated, combining practical health care with psychological support. Healers weren't just treating physical ailments, they were maintaining the overall health of the community ecosystem. This meant preventing the spread of infectious diseases, managing chronic conditions, and addressing the mental health challenges that inevitably arose during winter confinement. Herbal medicines were prepared and stored throughout the Longhouse, ready for immediate use when needed. But more importantly, the healers understood the connection between physical and mental health. They recognized that depression, anxiety, and social conflicts could manifest as physical symptoms, and they treated the whole person rather than just isolated problems. The ventilation and air quality management had psychological benefits beyond just preventing carbon monoxide poisoning. Fresh air and proper oxygen levels were essential for maintaining mental clarity and emotional stability. The careful management of smoke, cooking odors, and human body odors helped prevent the kind of sensory overload that could trigger conflicts or mental health crises. The lighting management was equally important for psychological well-being. During the darkest months of winter, when natural sunlight was scarce and weak, the Longhouse fires provided not just heat, but also the light necessary for maintaining normal circadian rhythms. The positioning and intensity of fires were managed to provide adequate illumination for daily activities while conserving fuel. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Longhouse psychology was the conflict resolution systems that prevented small disputes from escalating into community-threatening problems. With dozens of people living in close proximity for months at a time, conflicts were inevitable. The difference was that Native American communities had developed sophisticated methods for managing and resolving these conflicts before they became dangerous. Mediation processes allowed neutral parties to help resolve disputes between individuals or families. Restorative justice practices focused on healing relationships rather than punishing offenders. Community councils provided forums for addressing larger issues that affected everyone, and exile protocols existed for the rare cases where individuals became truly disruptive to community survival. The food-sharing protocols weren't just about nutrition. They were about maintaining social bonds and preventing the kind of hoarding behaviors that could destroy community trust. Meals were communal events that reinforced shared identity and mutual dependence. Even when food was scarce, sharing protocols ensured that everyone received some nourishment, rather than allowing some to feast while others starved. The preparation and cooking processes were also communal activities that provided social interaction and purpose during the long winter months. Women worked together to process stored foods, prepare meals, and maintain food supplies. These activities created opportunities for conversation, skill sharing, and mutual support that were essential for psychological well-being. The child care systems distributed responsibility for young people across the entire community, rather than placing the burden solely on biological parents. This meant that children received attention and care from multiple adults, reducing the stress on individual families and ensuring that children continued to develop socially and intellectually even during the most challenging months. Children were integrated into adult activities rather than segregated into separate playgroups. They participated in storytelling sessions, learned practical skills through observation and practice, and contributed to community work according to their abilities. This integration helped maintain their psychological development and prepared them for adult responsibilities. The education systems operating within Longhouses were continuous rather than seasonal. Winter months provided opportunities for intensive instruction in skills, knowledge, and cultural values that would be essential for survival and success. Young people learned not just practical techniques, but also the social and psychological skills necessary for community leadership. The artistic and creative activities that flourished during winter months weren't just hobbies. They were essential psychological outlets that helped people maintain mental health and cultural identity. Beadwork, carving, weaving, and other crafts provided opportunities for individual expression within the communal environment. These activities also produce useful items for trade and daily life, making them both personally satisfying and economically valuable. Music and dance adapted for the indoor environment provided physical exercise, emotional release, and community bonding. Songs preserved historical information and cultural values while providing entertainment and psychological support. Dances modified for limited space still allowed for physical expression and social interaction. The seasonal cycle management helped people maintain psychological orientation during months when natural markers of time passage were obscured by constant cold and limited daylight. Community calendars tracked important dates and events. Ritual observances marked the passage of winter and built anticipation for spring activities. These temporal anchors prevented the kind of psychological disorientation that could lead to depression or anxiety. But all of these psychological technologies depended on one fundamental principle that modern society has largely abandoned: the understanding that individual survival and community survival are inseparable. In a longhouse, you couldn't save yourself at the expense of others because everyone's survival depended on the group functioning as a unified system. This wasn't altruism or idealism, it was practical necessity. If you hoarded food while others starved, the resulting conflict would destroy the community, and everyone would die. If you refused to participate in essential work, the extra burden on others would eventually lead to system failure. If you created social disruption through selfish behavior, the resulting chaos would undermine everyone's chances of survival. The Longhouse system worked because it aligned individual self-interest with community well-being. Taking care of others was the most effective way to take care of yourself. Contributing to community success was the best strategy for personal survival. This alignment created a psychological environment where cooperation felt natural and necessary rather than forced or artificial. The result was communities that not only survived winter, but emerged stronger and more cohesive in spring. The shared hardships and mutual support of winter months created bonds that lasted throughout the year. The skills and knowledge developed during winter confinement made communities more resilient and capable. The psychological technologies developed for winter survival proved valuable for managing other challenges and crises. Modern research into isolated communities and extreme environments has confirmed many of the psychological principles that Native Americans discovered through centuries of winter survival. The importance of structured activities, distributed leadership, conflict resolution systems, and shared purpose are now recognized as essential elements for maintaining mental health in challenging conditions. But what makes the Longhouse system remarkable isn't just that it worked, but that it created conditions where people could not just survive, but actually thrive during some of the most challenging circumstances imaginable. Archaeological evidence shows that Longhouse communities weren't just grimly enduring winter. They were continuing to develop art, technology, social systems, and spiritual practices that enriched their cultures and improved their lives. The children born and raised in longhouses during winter months weren't psychologically damaged by the experience. They were strengthened by it. They learned resilience, cooperation, and community responsibility in ways that prepared them for leadership roles in their societies. The elders who spent their final winters in longhouses weren't warehoused or neglected. They were honored as repositories of wisdom and experience whose knowledge was essential for community survival. The thermal engineering, the social psychology, and the community organization all worked together to create something that was greater than the sum of its parts. A human system that could not only survive extreme conditions, but could use those conditions as opportunities for growth, learning, and strengthening of community bonds. And this brings us to one of the most ingenious aspects of Longhouse winter survival that most people never consider: the clothing systems that worked in perfect harmony with the communal heating environment. These weren't just random animal skins thrown over bodies. These were engineered garment systems designed to work as part of the larger thermal ecosystem of the Longhouse itself. Picture this. You wake up in the middle of a February night inside a Longhouse. The temperature outside has dropped to 30 below zero, but inside, pressed against 20 other bodies under layers of carefully selected furs, you're actually warm enough that you need to shed a layer. This isn't accident. This is the result of clothing technology that understood something modern outdoor gear companies are just beginning to rediscover: the power of layering systems that can be adjusted in real time. The base layer against the skin was typically softened deer hide, worked until it felt like butter, and treated with animal fats that created a moisture-wicking barrier. This wasn't just comfort, it was survival technology. Wet skin in cold conditions equals death. And these base layers managed moisture while maintaining insulation properties even when damp. But here's where it gets really clever. Unlike modern clothing designed for individual use, Longhouse garments were designed for sharing. Oversized robes could cover multiple people. Blankets were sized for communal use. Even individual garments had features that made them more effective when people were pressed together in groups. The outer layers were selected for their specific thermal properties, but also for their durability under the conditions of Longhouse living. Bear hide provided weight and warmth, but also withstood the constant abrasion of people moving against each other in close quarters. Beaver fur offered water resistance for the inevitable condensation and occasional leaks. Rabbit skin blankets were lightweight, but incredibly warm when multiple pelts were sewn together into large communal coverings. The footwear systems were particularly ingenious because feet were the most vulnerable to cold-related injury, yet they also needed to function in the varied conditions inside a Longhouse. Moccasins weren't just shoes. They were thermal management systems, multiple layers of hide, fur, and insulating materials like dried grass created air pockets that trapped warm air around feet and legs. But the real innovation was in the modularity. Additional layers could be added or removed based on activity level and ambient temperature. Someone tending fires near the central hearth might wear minimal foot coverings to prevent overheating. Someone sleeping near the outer walls might wrap their feet in additional layers of fur and hide. The head covering systems understood something that modern cold weather gear often misses. The head isn't just another body part to keep warm. It's a critical thermal regulation zone that affects the entire body's temperature management. Hoods, caps, and wraps weren't just protection from cold, they were temperature control devices. During sleep, when body temperature naturally drops, additional head coverings could be added to compensate. During active periods when body heat production increased, head coverings could be removed to prevent overheating. The ability to fine-tune body temperature through head covering adjustments was crucial for maintaining comfort in the variable conditions inside a longhouse. The hand and arm protection systems were equally sophisticated. Hands needed to remain functional for essential tasks like fire tending, food preparation, and emergency repairs. But they were also extremely vulnerable to cold injury. Mittens and arm coverings were designed to provide maximum warmth while allowing for the dexterity needed for survival tasks. But perhaps most remarkably, the entire clothing system was designed to work better when people were in close physical contact. Garments that overlapped between individuals created additional insulating air spaces. Shared coverings distributed warmth more evenly than individual items. The clothing itself became part of the communal heating strategy. This integration extended to the storage and maintenance of clothing within the longhouse environment. Garments were hung near fires to dry and warm them before use. Furs were rotated regularly to prevent moisture buildup and maintain their insulating properties. Repairs and modifications were made continuously to adapt clothing to changing conditions and needs. The psychological impact of this clothing technology was just as important as its thermal properties. Well-designed, comfortable clothing contributed to mental well-being and social cohesion. People who were physically comfortable were less likely to become irritable or depressed during the long winter months. Clothing that allowed for social bonding through sharing and physical closeness supported the community structures that were essential for survival. But the clothing systems also had to address some unique challenges that modern people rarely consider. Living in close quarters with limited washing facilities meant that odor management became a survival issue. Certain furs and treatments were selected specifically for their ability to resist odor buildup or to mask human scents. Smoking treatments not only preserved hides, but also provided ongoing odor control. The durability requirements were extreme. Clothing had to withstand months of continuous wear, sleeping, and close contact with other people and materials. Seams had to remain intact under stress. Fastenings had to function reliably in cold conditions. Materials had to maintain their properties despite constant use and limited maintenance opportunities. The repair and modification systems were built into the clothing technology itself. Garments were designed to be easily repaired using materials and tools available within the Longhouse. Modular construction allowed damaged sections to be replaced without rebuilding entire garments. Standardized techniques meant that anyone in the community could perform basic repairs and modifications. Now, let's talk about something that might make you uncomfortable, but was absolutely critical to Longhouse survival. The bathroom situation. When you're trapped inside a structure with up to 100 people for months at a time, waste management becomes a matter of life and death. Get it wrong, and disease will kill everyone faster than the cold ever could. The Haudenosaunee had developed sophisticated waste management systems that most medieval European cities couldn't match. These weren't primitive solutions. They were engineered systems that prevented contamination, controlled odors, and maintained health standards that were remarkable for any era. The primary waste management strategy was location-based. Designated areas outside the Longhouse, but protected from the worst weather, served as communal facilities. These weren't just random spots. They were carefully selected based on drainage, wind patterns, and distance from water sources and food storage areas. But winter weather often made trips outside dangerous or impossible. For these situations, Longhouses had interior waste management systems that were both practical and surprisingly hygienic. Covered containers, strategically placed and regularly emptied, provided emergency facilities that prevented contamination of living spaces. The waste disposal protocols were strictly enforced because everyone understood that carelessness could kill the entire community. Designated individuals were responsible for waste management, and this wasn't considered degrading work, but essential community service that required skill and dedication. Composting systems turned human and food waste into valuable fertilizer for spring planting, but these systems had to be carefully managed to prevent disease and odor problems. The location, construction, and maintenance of these systems required sophisticated understanding of decomposition, drainage, and hygiene principles. Personal hygiene within Longhouses was another challenge that required innovative solutions. With limited water and no privacy, maintaining cleanliness required community cooperation and efficient systems. Snow could be melted for washing, but fuel was precious, so water use had to be carefully managed. Dry cleaning methods using absorbent materials and aromatic herbs helped maintain personal cleanliness when water washing wasn't practical. These techniques weren't just about comfort. They were about preventing skin diseases and infections that could spread rapidly in close quarters. The bathing protocols were designed around the thermal management systems of the Longhouse. Washing with warm water near the fires provided both hygiene benefits and thermal comfort. The timing of bathing activities was coordinated to prevent heat loss and maintain air quality within the structure. Hair care was particularly important because hair could harbor insects and contribute to hygiene problems. Specialized combs and treatments kept hair clean and pest-free. Hairstyles were adapted to the conditions of Longhouse living, prioritizing health and practicality over appearance. Dental hygiene was maintained using natural materials and techniques that were surprisingly effective. Chewing sticks, herbal rinses, and abrasive materials helped prevent dental problems that could become serious health issues during winter isolation when complex medical treatment wasn't available. The medical waste management was equally sophisticated. Materials contaminated with blood or other bodily fluids were handled using protocols that prevented the spread of infection. These procedures were based on centuries of experience with disease prevention in close quarters. Menstrual hygiene was managed using natural materials and protocols that maintained comfort and health while respecting cultural practices and privacy needs. These systems had to function effectively in the challenging conditions of winter longhouse living while supporting the health and dignity of women in the community. Food safety and waste management were integrated systems that prevented contamination while maximizing the use of available resources. Food scraps were carefully managed to prevent pest attraction and disease while providing materials for other uses. Cooking waste was handled in ways that supported overall longhouse hygiene and thermal management. The ventilation systems that managed smoke and air quality also helped control odors and maintain acceptable air quality, despite the challenges of housing large numbers of people in confined spaces. The integration of waste management with air circulation showed sophisticated understanding of how these systems affected each other. But perhaps most importantly, the waste management systems were designed to maintain human dignity and social cohesion. Privacy protocols, community cooperation, and shared responsibility ensured that necessary biological functions didn't become sources of shame or conflict that could undermine community survival. The enforcement of waste management protocols was handled through community pressure and social norms, rather than individual punishment. Everyone understood that cooperation in these matters was essential for survival, and social systems reinforced these behaviors through positive reinforcement, rather than negative consequences. The seasonal adaptation of waste management systems accounted for changing conditions throughout the winter months. Early winter protocols differed from midwinter procedures, which differed again from late winter practices. This flexibility allowed the systems to remain effective as conditions changed and as resources became more or less available. The integration of waste management with other survival systems showed the holistic thinking that characterized successful longhouse communities. Waste heat from composting contributed to thermal management. Waste materials provided resources for other activities. Waste management schedules coordinated with other community activities to maximize efficiency and minimize disruption. Now let's explore what might be the most remarkable aspect of longhouse winter survival. How these communities didn't just survive, they actually thrived and continued to develop their cultures, technologies, and social systems even during the most challenging months of the year. Archaeological evidence reveals something that challenges our modern assumptions about survival in extreme conditions. Longhouse sites from winter months show evidence of sophisticated craft production, artistic creation, and technological innovation. These weren't communities just grimly hanging on until spring. These were societies that used winter as an opportunity for cultural development and community strengthening. The tool-making activities that flourished during winter months weren't just maintenance and repair work. They were opportunities for innovation and skill development that advanced the community's technological capabilities. Master craftspeople used the long winter nights to train apprentices in techniques that required patience and attention to detail. Weapon making was particularly sophisticated during winter months. The controlled environment of the Longhouse allowed for precise work that would be difficult in outdoor conditions. Bows were crafted with attention to detail that could mean the difference between successful hunting and starvation. Arrows were fletched and balanced with precision that reflected generations of accumulated expertise. The textile production that occurred during winter months was remarkable in its sophistication and beauty. Weaving, beadwork, and decorative arts reached levels of complexity that rivaled any contemporary civilization. These weren't just practical items, but artistic achievements that expressed cultural values and individual creativity. The knowledge preservation systems that operated during winter months were essentially universities housed within survival shelters. Elders passed down accumulated wisdom about everything from astronomical observations to medicinal plant properties to complex social protocols. This knowledge transfer wasn't casual conversation, but structured education that ensured cultural continuity. The mathematical and scientific knowledge embedded in Longhouse design and operation was transmitted through hands-on education during winter months. Young people learned about structural engineering, thermodynamics, resource management, and community organization through direct participation in survival activities. So there you have it. Native Americans didn't just survive winter in longhouses. They mastered it through engineering that would impress modern architects, social systems that maintained community cohesion under impossible stress, and psychological technologies that turned isolation into opportunity. They proved that survival isn't about individual toughness. It's about collective intelligence. The next time you're complaining about your heating bill, remember the people who heated 100 bodies with nothing but wood, bark, and pure human ingenuity.